Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This video is brought to you by Edullect Academy. Ahsanul Qawaid sessions are delivered by Ustadh Shah. Please like, subscribe and share.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم. All praise and thanks belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We send our abundant salutations and prayers upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Welcome back. Alhamdulillah. In today's session, we are going to continue as part of lesson 1 and study the Arabic letters and how they are written when they are joined up and where, depending on where they're positioned, how they appear in the Quran. So if you recall, in the last session we completed this exercise 3, which was part of lesson 1. It's really important, as part of a prerequisite, you're able to identify each one of these letters, the harf and the huruf in this page, which is page number 4. So if you haven't done this exercise, please make sure you do, and you're able to identify each one of these letters without making any mistakes, because that's the prerequisite to this session. So in this lesson, which is part of lesson 1, it's a continuation of lesson 1, we're going to look at joining up letters. So we'll make a start. When alif is at the beginning of a word, then it will always appear on its own. So this is how it looks when it's in the beginning, and this is how it looks when it's in the middle and when it's in the end of a word. So the beginning is on its own, which you are already familiar with. But in order to identify an alif in the middle of a word or at the end of a word, the alif will be joined from the right side and then the line will go straight up. Now, often I find learners make a mistake in identifying alif and lam, and they can't differentiate the difference between the two, and I find that quite often. And the way that you should be able to identify, keep an eye on where the joining is happening. So if the joining is coming from the right to the alif, and the line goes up, then it is an alif. So that's how it's written in the middle and at the end. We move on to the next letter, which is ba. So at the end, the ba looks pretty much the way that a ba is written, which you are familiar with. But in the middle and in the beginning, it's written different. The common theme in the ba harf is actually the dot. So the dot appearing in the bottom. Now you will note that these symbols, these ones, are actually very similar to how other letters are written. For example, you've got over here, which is the ta, you've got the tha, and later on we will study the nun as well, where the only way you will be able to identify which letter it is by knowing where the position of the dot is, or looking at where the position of the dot is. So in this case, a ba at the beginning of a word will be written like this or like this. In the middle, it will be like this. And at the end, it will be almost similar to the way that it's written, the way that you are familiar with. Moving on to the ta. The ta is written in a number of ways. Again, the way that you will be able to identify a ta from any other letter is where the 2 dots are. So that's what's common in every single one of these forms of writing. So the ta, if we look at the end, looks similar to the ta that you are familiar with so far. And at the beginning, it's written like this, almost identical to a ba, but the 2 dots are on top. Again, it looks similar to the ba, but the 2 dots on top. And then you've got the ta, which is in the middle, which is identical to the ba, but the dots are on top. And then you've got the ta, which is something that you are familiar with. And then you've got another way of writing the ta, which almost looks like a ha, but the 2 dots. and there's significance in the way that this is written and this is written. So therefore, you need to familiarize yourself with the different ways of the letters, particularly the ta being written. We now move on to the tha. The tha, again, identical to the ba. The only difference is you've got 3 dots on top. So where you've got the same symbol but the 3 dots on top, it's a tha. Now, some students can't differentiate between the letter shin and tha, because if you look at, say for example, shin, if I go back to one of the sessions, shin has 3 dots and so does tha. So often the way that shin is written and tha is written, you have to be very careful in identifying the way it's written. So the tha and shin are very different in the sense that the dots are there, but the way that the bottom part is written is very different. If I just quickly move to it and show you over here, you've got the 3 dots, but you can see it's like a small W. And then at the beginning it's like a small W. Very different. It's got the 3 dots, but it's very different to how it's written here. So you'll need to memorize this in order to differentiate between a tha and a shin. So again, you've got tha, identical to the way that ta, ba are written, but the only difference is you have 3 dots. That's what you have to try and memorize. Then you move on to the jim, ha and kha. They are all identical apart from where the dots are. Where you have a dot underneath, it's a jim. So jim at the beginning, that's how it looks. Jim in the middle, jim at the end. Almost identical to how you know it so far. So you'll simply have to memorize the way that the jim is written at the top. So the way you might want to, it might help you, the way it might help you to memorize this is if you look at over here, that part of the jim. So if you think about maybe that part of the jim is being taken as a short version of the jim for the beginning and the middle, that might help. But note that you have to identify where the dot is in order to know which letter it is. So the jim, the dot is in the bottom. The ha has no dots, so identical to the jim but no dots whatsoever. That's how you identify ha at the beginning, in the middle, in the end. Kha is identified by the dot on the top. So it's identical to the jim and ha in the sense that you've got the same symbol part apart from the dot. So the dot appears on top. So kha at the beginning, kha in the middle, and kha at the end. Then we move to dal. Straightforward. Looks almost identical to the way that dal is written. Beginning is written in the way that you already know. In the middle, it's written with a line coming into it. The dal at the end is almost identical to the dal in the middle. So that should be relatively straightforward. So now moving on to page 6, we now look at dal. Dal is written again like dal, but with a dot on top. And that's how you differentiate between the dal and dal. And they look similar to how you already know the dal to be. So that's how it's written in the beginning, middle, and end. Moving on to ra. Ra in the beginning can be written the same as in the middle or at the end. However, there is another way of writing ra. In some of the scripts, it may be written, ra may be written like this. So you'll simply have to memorize that particular symbol in order to identify it as ra. Now, the thing is ra and za are identical apart from the dot. So za, which is the next letter, is identical to the ra, but it has a dot, similar to the middle and at the end. So if you can identify ra, you should be able to identify za immediately because the za has the 2 dots. Moving on to the sin. The sin in the beginning will be written in this form. In the middle, almost similar, but with a line coming out from the previous letter, and then the sin that you are familiar with. So the way to remember sin and shin is the sin, this part of the letter, the way it's written is taken, and then the other bits are avoided. So in the version of shin, the only difference between sin and shin is the 3 dots. Now remember, as I explained earlier, that you need to be able to identify shin with the small w that you have here, and therefore differentiate this letter, the shin letter, from the tha letter. So that's the tha letter with the 3 dots, but note there's no W symbol at the bottom, whereas the shin has the W. Okay, so that's your shin. Moving on to Sad. Now the Sad and Dad are easy to identify. The first part of the letter, the way that it's written, that you're familiar with, is the part that's taken to start the word when Sad is used. So you have Sad written in this way, from at the beginning of a word, and then in the middle, and at the end, which you are familiar with. So the difference between Sad and Dad is that Dad has a dot on top. So you should be able to identify what a Dad looks like in the beginning, middle, and at the end, inshallah. So just note the first part of that, the letter shape is taken as part of the beginning and the middle. We move on to ta and dha. They're very easy because you will have studied ta like this previously, and therefore you're familiar with that. And the ta in the middle and at the end looks identical, but it's just the line joining into that letter. So that's ta. The difference between ta and dha is that dha has a dot. So you'll note that every one of these ones look identical to the ta, but the difference is the dot. So the dot appearing on top means it's a dha. So moving on to ayn. Ayn is written like this in the beginning of a word. In the middle it's written like this, and at the end it's written like this. So it's not as familiar, you're not as familiar with the ayn as you were with some of the other letters. So if I go back and I'll show you, this is how ayn is written, how you are familiar with. So the part that's different is literally over here, and then you've got the curly part appearing at the end. So if I go back now, here, that's, you've got the curly part, and there's no sort of open circle here. It's a full loop. So you've got that loop, and then you've got the curl coming down. That's how you identify an ayn. So the top part of the symbol is taken as the ayn if it's written in the middle, and at the beginning it's written like this, which is actually the same as the ayn written as you know it, which is literally the top part. Okay, so that should help you to remember the way that ayn is written in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. So continuing to page number 7, ghain is written almost identical to ayn. The only difference is the dot on top. So if I go back, ayn, beginning, middle, end, and if I go to ghain, beginning, middle, and end. So it's simply where the dot is placed. So this is ghain, middle, ghain at the beginning, and ghain at the end. Fa over here is the end one you are familiar with, apart from that joining in. But if you take that first part of that joining, that becomes your middle, and then fa, simply the beginning part of fa with the dot. So the way you identify fa and qaf is that qaf is written identical to fa. However, the dots differentiate between a fa letter and a qaf letter. So the qaf at the beginning is written with the 2 dots like a fa at the bottom, and then in the middle with the 2 dots on top, and at the end 2 dots. So you can see that the qaf, this one you're familiar with, so the first part of that is written in order to identify the letter in the middle. and that's how it's written in the middle, and at the beginning, that's how it's written. Kaf at the end is written like the way that you know it to be, and you've studied so far, but in the middle and at the beginning, it's almost similar. It's written slightly differently, and you simply have to memorize how it's written. Okay, so that's kaf in the beginning, middle, and end. Then you have the lam. Now, this is the one I previously mentioned to you that often learners make a mistake between an alif and a lam. A lam, the joining goes to the next one, not from the previous one. So you'll notice there's no line coming into the lam. It's actually going from the lam into the next letter. Similarly, over here, you've got the lam that's going out. Now, if it didn't go to the next, that line didn't appear at the end here, then it will be an alif. But because it is going straight across to the next letter, it becomes a lam. And then the lam you are familiar with. So if I just show you again the difference between the lam and then alif over here. So this is lam and this is alif. So alif is written with the line coming in from the previous letter into the alif, but in the sense of lam, it's going to the next one. So even if if it's in the middle, then it will continue to the next one. So that's how you identify a lam. Moving on to mim. So mim written in the beginning like this, middle and end. Now the end one you are familiar with. So if you just take that circle bit, you will note that that's how you identify a mim. And you should be able to identify mim relatively easy because that part of the symbol is identical throughout. And there's nothing else that looks identical to that. And then nun, as I previously mentioned, the ba, ta, tha. The difference between those harf, the way that they're written, is where the placements of the dots are. In this case, nun is also written identical apart from where the dot is. So if the dot was in the bottom, then it will be a ba in this case and in this case and also in this case. But nun, the way that we identify a nun at the beginning is if there is a dot on top. So you will note that if I go back to the first page number 5, first part of this session, you will note that ba is written. So these two, the beginning and middle, is identical to the nun over here, beginning and middle, but the dot is on top. That's how you identify nun from a ba. And then the nun you are familiar with, the symbol at the end. Waw is identical, waw in the beginning, middle and end. Ha is identical at the beginning. The middle is, you've got a stretched version of this, which is in the middle, and at the end it appears in these two forms. If you remember previously, we looked at the way that ta was written. So if you just remember this symbol here, if we go back to ta, you've got these two symbols again. So how do you differentiate between a ta and a ha? Is ta has 2 dots and ha has no dots. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Then you move to ya. So ya is written and it looks similar to, or in some sense identical to, the way that ba, ta, tha and nun are written. But then the way that you differentiate is where the placement of the dots are. So in the case of a ya, you will be familiar with this symbol. It has 2 dots at the bottom. Then if you see 2 dots at the bottom with this symbol, it's ya, or like these symbols, ya. So again, if you have a look, nun is written almost identical to a ya, and which we previously saw, ba, ta and tha was written like that. But the way you identify the letters is by looking at where the dots are. So alhamdulillah, this completes lesson 1. So far we have studied how the letters are written in its normal generic form. And then we've also studied how the letters are written at the beginning, middle, and end. So please make sure that you go through this lesson and you familiarize yourself with how the Arabic letters are written, both in its normal form as well as at the beginning, middle, and end. So after this session, in the next session, what we are going to do is we're going to review, as part of lesson 2, is review all of that again in order to make sure that we are absolutely clear about how the letters are written and we can identify them and also pronounce them as well. So until next time, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep you well and keep you in best of Iman. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We hope you benefited from this video. Please like, subscribe and share so that you too can be rewarded for the work that we do.